my friend Max today.
Hi.
Hello. We're going to talk about belonging, which will be the first in a few episodes that are going to center around belonging and diversity as a concept. Starting with this one, introducing belonging, talking about why it's important, some of the factors to it. And then we also want to have an episode where we're going to talk a little bit about diversity, safety, representation, and intersectionality. Not necessarily in that order, but those are the ideas that are out there. So to start, Max, do you want to introduce yourself and a little bit about your horse background?
Yeah, I'd love to. I have been having horses in my life since I was like 4 or 5 when I went to that one kid's birthday party and sat on a horse for 10 seconds and then basically yelled at my mom until she let me have riding lessons. And since then it has been a bit of a journey, as most things are, and I spent quite a few years running a farm after I dropped out of college to come home and taught a lot of riding lessons, did training, did boarding. I've been very lucky to experience the horse industry from a lot of different angles. And now I am pursuing a degree to become an equine assisted therapist and combining my love of community support and mental health support with horses. And that's pretty exciting and kind of a topic of what we're talking about today. So
it's almost like that's why I asked
it's almost like that's why I'm here.
You were talking to me a little bit before we started recording about some of the classes that you've taken recently and focusing on the importance of belonging.
Yeah, the degree program that I'm in starts any social sciences program with this class, which is a kind of focus on the concept of belonging through the lens of different social sciences like anthropology or psychology. So it's a interdisciplinary approach to this idea. And one of the core tenets of it is that a sense of belonging is as important of a human need as like food or shelter. And that isn't always acknowledged in a lot of different spaces, and that can be really detrimental for a variety of reasons. So
yeah, I mean, when you think about that hierarchy of needs, psychological and physical safety is right there.
Base level.
That's base level what you need to thrive.
Yeah, I think in some ways it's a thing that we share with horses, because horses also require community connection and belonging in order to be thriving, healthy creatures, because they're herd animals, and humans evolved to live in community with each other. And to feel that you don't belong in your community is to experience not being sure if you can meet any of your needs, because we are so dependent on each other. And that is not helpful for anybody.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of people come to horses and experience horses and enjoy the sense of the community that comes just from being we all love horses, which is a really great thing. And it's really amazing that we all get to just love horses together. And I think sometimes people's identity beyond that becomes kind of pushed to the side a little bit and minimized as less important, which if you fit the norm, mostly straight white women riding horses, wealthy straight white women riding horses, then that probably feels fine, because this is the main part of your differentiating identity, is that you like horses. But for me, and I think you relate to this too, and a lot of other people who are in more minority groups, it feels really othering, because there is an assumption that that is enough when it's kind of not.
Yeah, I think the idea of an identity-specific community, to me, is a really fascinating one, because what you're describing of a barn community is an identity-specific community in the sense that everybody who's there is there presumably because they like to ride horses. And for some people, that is enough of a connection point to feel that deep sense of belonging, which for me feels like safety, and I think it maybe feels different for other people, but it has a lot of the same principles. But for other people who are in marginalized communities, that's not enough, which is when we get into the concept of intersectionality, which is kind of its own whole thing that is interesting and also challenging to talk about sometimes.
And needs a longer conversation. Which maybe that'll be episode 3 of this series or something. Well, and we keep talking about safety, and I think that physical safety, I hope that if you're going to your hobby, you're physically safe. You shouldn't feel like somebody's gonna, well, I mean, it's interesting with horses, because if you're engaging in your hobby, you're not actually all that physically safe.
Well, that's the funny thing too, right? Because horses in any capacity, whether you're riding or ground or whatever it is a sport activity that requires a high level of risk awareness.
Yep.
So people walking into that situation to ride are already expecting some level of risk. And the risk, that sensation shouldn't come from like the fear of discrimination or from the fear of something other than just your horse being a horse.
Right. Yeah, I mean, even if you're not riding, there are signs in any barn that you go to that tell you this is not a spectator sport. You don't get to.
This is not a safe place.
Like,
yeah.
You could be kicked. Beyond the horses, you shouldn't expect a human to come up and punch you in the face.
Right.
When you, like, I feel like in that regard, the bar is on the floor. It shouldn't have to be a conversation about that type of safety, which is where we get into psychological safety, which again, kind of feels like a base level ask.
Yeah, and I think it's important to contextualize this kind of conversation, just to like name the reality that a lot of people in the US are living under right now, especially if I'll speak for myself as like a queer and trans person, like just the rise of transphobia and homophobia in varying different levels, from like corporate to individual to violence to suicide levels. Like it's just through the roof, and that sets the tone for my whole life. Like that is not something that I can leave at the door of the barn when I go to the barn. As much as I would like to be able to walk into the barn and be like, well, I'm a horse person and I'm here around all these other horse people, so the rest of the things that I'm scared of aren't there anymore. But that's just not the reality. And I'm sure it isn't for a lot of other people.
No. And especially since horses are typically more conservative spaces, when you have a figurehead of conservative spaces that is blatantly a terrible human being who hates people who look like you and talk like you and live their life like you, and you go into the barn and it actually, like, your hackles kind of go up. You have a question of like, who here believes that, and who here is thinking that. And for myself, I don't look that gay. Like when I go, like it's something that I've been frustrated by actually. Like people will be like, straight passing privilege, which in a lot of parts of my life is like kind of frustrating. I'm like, no, I actually really want you to know that I'm a lesbian. Like I wish it was clearer in some ways, but I also like the way I look, so I'm not gonna like change it for straight people because that's what it would be doing. But it has put me in a couple of interesting situations where people have made comments to me where I've been like, oh, you don't know I'm gay. You don't know that you're not talking to a Republican white woman. You're talking to a socialist lesbian. Like,
yeah.
And it's interesting because if I'm feeling that as somebody who looks straight and who like passes as that in most spaces, I can't imagine what it feels like to look visibly queer in those spaces and like interact with those same people who probably give me more grace than they give someone who's more visibly queer.
Yeah, I mean, just in the last couple of years, I have had some crazy experiences as I've transitioned, because I have been involved with horses so long that I had spent so much time pre-transition when I was like miserably unhappy but still a woman, and knew so many people and had so many connections, and then stayed in that community a little bit through my transition, and now am a whole different person in some regards and look very different and use a different name and everything. And living through that has been fascinating and in some ways really encouraging, in the sense that there have been quite a few people who it really doesn't seem to matter to them, and they've been very respectful and kind, and it's been very like a non-issue, which is a little different from it being celebrated, I will say, but it's been a non-issue. But then I also had the experience a year and a half ago-ish of being in between jobs and being a week out from top surgery and frantically looking around to try to find a job that I could kind of pick up and start right after I healed from surgery. And horses have always been my fallback, and working at barns has always been my like go-to when I'm like, I just need something. And I was lined up to work at a barn and pretty immediately realized that it was not going to be a space that I could be seen pre and post surgery and be safe. And had to decline the job offer because there was just no way that the demographic of the clients at that facility would have tolerated that.
You mentioned accepted versus celebrated. I think that's why, especially in horse spaces, it's kind of important, if you are an ally, to be loud about it.
Yeah.
It helps me feel more safe.
I mean, I think it helps everyone feel more safe. The idea of increasing belonging in your community is you kind of bring everyone with you. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily just for like the one subgroup of people who are not feeling belonging. It's something that could increase everybody's sense of belonging in the long run, because then you're not leaving anyone behind in that community, which I think happens far too often. I think that is one of the pitfalls of thinking that just because we all love horses here means that we are like a close-knit community. That's half the work. Like the second half of the work is making sure that the people who are in that space who are either particularly vulnerable or marginalized or for whatever reason need that extra hand are getting that extra hand to be invited into the community more.
And it's good for the community. Everything that you look at, the science tells us that DEI, if from a business perspective, is amazing. It has like one of the best ROIs of any workforce development effort. Having diverse minds in your conversation means that you're going to have better conversations, and it means that you're going to make better choices because you're pulling on a different range of experiences. I think this isn't something we've talked about here, but it's a conversation that I've seen happening, which is that horse sports are dying. And I think a lot of the reason horse sports are dying is because they're refusing to change, and they're refusing to be anything other than what they've always been. And part of that is because we're listening to the same voices over and over again, and people who, again, think different, look different, act different, love different, are being excluded, which is not helping.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of evolve or die, right? That's like the world is changing, and our sports have to change to find a way through that.
And I think one thing that people are discouraged by when it comes to having these conversations is that it's really uncomfortable, which as a queer person, it's uncomfortable. Sometimes I have conversations with other queer people and I'm uncomfortable, and it's weird. I come from an upper middle class family. I'm white. Really the only thing that I've got going as far as diversity goes is that I'm a woman and I'm a lesbian. And that's kind of it. So there are absolutely conversations I've had where I've been like, oh, you have pointed out a new thing about my privilege that I didn't think about before. And now I feel squirrely and I didn't want to think about that. That's uncomfortable. But if we think about how we, if we simplify it down to horses, you literally put your horse in slightly uncomfortable situations to help them grow their frustration tolerance in order to better themselves. And you can apply that back to yourself too.
I think having conversations that feel uncomfortable is never inherently a bad thing, because I think being a little bit uncomfortable is a piece of information. When you are put in a situation to become uncomfortable, that is you having an opportunity to learn something about yourself. And what you might learn is, I need to not be in this situation. But what you might learn is that you have some beliefs or ideas that maybe are incorrect and that you need to figure out how to adjust. Having those conversations from a place of empathy and kindness is a requirement if the discomfort is going to be productive at all.
Yeah. And curiosity.
Yeah.
Most queer people who I know, there are a few of them. I have a few friends who are sick of having these conversations with straight people. They're not interested in it. They don't want to have those conversations anymore. And I don't blame them. I think that that's their choice and it's fair. But most queer people want to have those conversations, actually. They would really love to be approached from a place of curiosity and learning.
Well, and I think it especially in a situation where you're trying to help increase a sense of belonging in your community, contextualizing the conversation from that place makes people more willing to share things about themselves. If the point of the conversation is, I want you to feel more comfortable here, then that is a much different place to come from than I want to just know things about you because I want to be nosy.
Right. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. There is absolutely a difference between somebody asking me about being a lesbian and somebody being like, what's making you uncomfortable here? Or what feels empowering in this space?
Yeah, and I think that second thing you just said is really important, because it's just as important to ask people what's not working and also what is working.
Yeah.
And I think asking people what does make you feel euphoric or you belong or you fit in here or you don't have to worry is maybe the most important question that you could ask, because it puts someone in a really powerful situation in terms of their own autonomy to advocate for the things that make them feel really comfortable.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have as much of the connotation of asking somebody how to do the least harm, which is a hard question to answer sometimes as a trans person, because I don't want to actually tell you how to not harm me. I want to tell you what would make me feel great.
Right.
And that, I don't think people sometimes miss the nuance in that.
Yeah, no, 100%. I'm thinking about in 2012 when the US legalized gay marriage, and everybody was super duper stoked. And I grew up with two moms who absolutely celebrated. It was really exciting. Like, it was really, really exciting to have all 50 states. You can get married if you're gay. Yeehaw. And then, like, 6 months later, they were like, all right, next thing. Like, it was a celebration, but it was like a celebration of the bare minimum. And then we, like, moved on because it was the least harm.
Yeah.
The least you can do is let gay people be married.
Is let gay people be married. Like,
oh, yay, we have the same rights as you now.
Right. We've caught up. Excellent. We've caught up.
Mm-hmm.
In some regards, we've caught up.
Yes.
You know, and I think, and that also, like, comes back to rooting this specific conversation that we're having in, like, what's happening right now,
mm-hmm.
which is, like, you know, the fact that my partner and I have just moved 30 minutes to a different town because we were not feeling safe where we were living because we are too outwardly queer and we were being harassed. My partner and I have had to rush our marriage, essentially. So we're trying to get married before the inauguration. We are frantically, trying not to frantically, but somewhat frantically making sure we have all of our documents, our passports and everything, because you have to take people at their word when they threaten your rights.
Yep.
Because why would I not? The ramifications of not taking it seriously do not even measure up to the ramifications of if it actually happens. When I have conversations with people about belonging, right now it's always coming from, like I said before, this place of like, my whole world doesn't feel super safe right now. And so to come into this community and want to feel part of it, it takes a little extra work from everyone else for it to be okay, basically.
Yeah. Well, I think in general, allies need to do more than just not be mean.
Right. There's like it's a little bit of a like spectrum here that we're talking about, right?
Like, I have a very good friend who I met in college, and I refer to her as my token straight friend, and I love her so much. And she comes from a fairly conservative family, and in college she would come to me and ask me questions all of the time, and it was so amazing. And I made her a PowerPoint presentation.
Oh my gosh.
And she sat down and she, like, it was like 100 slides.
Oh my gosh.
And we went through the whole thing. She brought snacks and a notebook, and I don't think I have ever felt more loved by a straight friend.
Oh my god, I love that.
It was incredible. Yeah. It was just like the most genuine show of curiosity and kindness that I have ever gotten from a straight person. And I think that curiosity is not very common. And so I feel very lucky to have her in my life.
Well, I think it's interesting because at the end of the day, as amazing as what you are describing is, all this person did was listen and like genuinely care.
Yes.
Which is not, that's not a lot to ask from somebody.
No.
At the end of the day, if it's somebody who wants to be in your life.
Right. Yeah. The next step is continuing that journey.
Right.
And like sticking up for people.
And sticking up for people. I, in the last few weeks, have started thinking to myself more and more about who do I spend my time with that I know would stick up for a trans person if there was no trans person in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that I know would speak up against like transphobic rhetoric or language or anything if there was no trans person in the room. And that has been really informative and like kind of enlightening as a way to just think about it. And as a way to think about what would I ask somebody in my life who I didn't feel that way about? Like, how would I have that conversation with them? And I have had actually a couple of tough conversations with people and basically just said, like, I don't feel like you would stand up for me if I wasn't there. And the responses have ranged from, like, of course I would, to, like, why would I need to? Which is, like, the second one I don't even totally know how to approach.
Yeah, I don't know how I'd respond to that either. It's telling that you're the person who's having those conversations and bringing them up, too. Because I think also part of allyship is making it known that you would stick up for a trans person if a trans person wasn't in the room. If somebody's making transphobic jokes, are you uncomfortably laughing along, or are you saying, what do you mean by that?
Right.
There's a right answer and a wrong answer.
Yeah. The ability to hear it is, I think, another part of it. Because I think people hear what is within their own personal context, and they're not listening for the things that would be considered transphobic or whatever you're trying to not put up with. You have to teach yourself to hear it and to listen for it.
Well, and again, especially with horses that are historically straight, white, wealthy, cisgender, you have to be more aware.
Yeah.
And you have to be more willing to put your foot down and be like, hey, what what the
does
heck?
that mean? Like, why?
Like, otherwise it's like a self-perpetuating cycle.
Yeah.
Like, you're gonna push the people out who are feeling othered if you don't intentionally make them feel included.
Right. It would be simpler if we were all just horses in some ways, but I think we bear a responsibility to acknowledge that we are not.
I don't want to be a horse.
No, it's a little exhausting.
When I was 5, I really wanted to be a horse, but
You've grown out of it.
I've grown out. I've seen too many of them like try to die in really creative ways.
Not be well. Yeah.
Yeah.
They do kind of, it really depends on where they end up.
I might want to be a horse in my mom's pasture.
Yeah.
Those boys seem pretty happy.
That could be nice.
They're just chilling.
They're just chilling.
They do nothing all
Just
day.
hanging
She just
out.
goes out there and brings them carrots.
Just vibing.
Like,
Just straight vibing.
heck yeah. I'd be that horse. I would not want to be a lot of other horses though. Just like in general. I don't think I'd want to be Jules.
No, you don't think so?
I-
Just in his big dumb brain all day.
No, he doesn't move right.
He's a little odd.
He's a little weird. I think
I would be Charlie for a day because I think I couldn't take more than a day of it. Because
you'd come out with more bees in your brain.
I'd be like, oh my god, I'm literally vibrating. He's a bee brain boy. Charlie knew I was trans before anybody else did. It's true. He's the first creature I told.
Oh, well, that's not surprising.
No, it's
actually,
not.
because they don't care.
No.
Why? It doesn't matter to them.
Well, this is like part of why I'm really excited about becoming a therapist that uses horses as well as other kind of like expressive artistic modalities in therapy. Is the horse is like in some ways the ultimate non-judgmental audience, and they are far more concerned about whether they are safe and respected and heard over anything else. And so I think there is also a reason why marginalized people or people who are experiencing some kind of othering feeling gravitate towards horses, which is a little bit of a tricky thing if you don't know if the community where you're participating is a safe one, because your horse could be the thing that feels the safest for you, but the people around you at the barn may not feel safe, and that can be really uncomfortable.
I think it's as simple in a lot of ways as a pride flag.
Yeah.
Or like having a little sign that just says like, you are welcome.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Like as like a starting point. If I were to be looking around at like a horse show or something, I'm more likely to talk to somebody who has a pride bumper sticker.
Yeah.
Than I am to talk to somebody who has no bumper stickers. Which is also partially because I hate talking to strangers. But
I mean, talking to people is hard.
if I saw another queer horse person, I would very excitedly go up to them and have a conversation with them.
Yeah, I think that's like, we all love to talk about how much we hate corporate pride, right? Like this idea that because a store has a rainbow flag or a rainbow sticker, it deserves our business more than not having our business. But I will say that kind of signaling, I guess, I find very comforting when I'm walking around downtown, going into stores. Every time I see one of those all are welcome signs, I'm like, oh, great. I love that. Even though I'm like, capitalism is the worst. I should never buy things. Every time I see one of those, I'm like, oh my God, I feel so safe here.
I think it means a lot more when it's in a local store.
Yeah.
Like, if I see it at a Target, I'm like, okay.
Okay, whatever.
Okay, Target.
Yeah, okay, Target.
But, like, my favorite bubble tea shop has a big pride painting in their window.
Yeah.
And I love them. And
Yeah.
I know that it's genuine. And I've, like, chatted with the people there. And I've chatted with the owner there. And, like, they mean it.
I
like,
also love that bubble tea shop, by the way. With local stores and local businesses having that kind of, and it is a form of representation in some ways, which is a thing we need to dive into more at some point. This idea that like when I see myself represented in some way in this space, whether it's a flag or a little sign or some other thing that makes me feel like I can see myself there, I feel so much safer.
And when it comes to horses, if you're buying a saddle, you're probably not necessarily looking at their DEI policies.
Right.
But if you're looking for a barn, you'll notice if there's a rainbow flag in the indoor.
Right. And that's another piece of what I was saying before, which is like, would a person in this room stand up for me? Seeing the flag, seeing the sign, seeing the representation is a message to me that there is somebody on this property that were I to have a problem with somebody would take it seriously and would probably try to help. And that is more important to me than almost anything else, is knowing that there is somebody who would have my back if there was any kind of confrontation. And I don't necessarily know that unless it's explicitly stated or explicitly shown to me.
Right.
How would I know that unless somebody says it or shows it to me, right?
Right. Well, I think that the complaint with bigger companies is that it's virtue signaling.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it is a ploy to get gay people to come in and spend money. Absolutely. In conservative spaces, like horses, it's a gamble. You're probably going to scare away a few people too.
Yes.
Like there are a lot of very conservative people in horses who won't board somewhere that has a rainbow flag in the indoor. And if I know that it's more important to you to have that be seen than to risk those couple of people, that says a lot.
Says a lot.
In a conservative space, that is huge.
I think it says a lot the other way too. I think it says a lot about somebody if they are too worried about losing clients to display any kind of outward symbol of safety for people who are current members of their community.
But beyond just putting flags up, there are other things that people can do.
Right. I think if you're somebody listening to this, or is there somebody in the world that we're living in right now who is wondering, how can I like help other people at my farm or my facility or in my horse community like feel like they belong? I think the first important piece of it is educating yourself.
Yep.
Right. If you're somebody who is not queer, is not trans, and doesn't have a lot of context for what that community is facing right now, the first step that you can take is just finding some resources and educating yourself, because relying on people who are scared to educate you is giving them a level of labor that they don't deserve to have put on them. I do think that once you've done that kind of initial research, it is really, really helpful to go to somebody in your community and say, this is what I've learned, and I was curious if you'd be willing to have a conversation with me and kind of help me fill in some of these gaps from your perspective. And then also tell me about what does make you feel safe here, and like, what can we do to help if it's not great right now.
And then if you do those things and you feel good about it and you want to do more, the next step is to like get involved.
Right.
Get out into the community. If you're willing to show up and be pointed in the right direction, that's super valuable. Get involved in your community. Reach out. See what you can do.
And I think if you're somebody who doesn't have a lot of queer or trans people in your life, so it doesn't feel super relevant to your day-to-day, it might be helpful to think more about, why do you do horses in the first place? Because a lot of people either have a barn or ride because that is their source of joy. And if you think about the person in your barn who is trans and it's the same reality for them, why would you not want to do whatever is in your power to make sure that their source of joy is as protected as yours and feels as much of a solace as yours? Why would that not be your first instinct? And if it's not, that might be something to think about and kind of examine for yourself.
At the end of the day, if you do this work and if you're vocal, you're going to have hard and weird conversations with people in the community. Part of allyship is being okay with that and being willing to have those weird and hard conversations, kind of whatever way they go. Because, like, you're not the one ultimately who's at risk.
And I would encourage somebody who is an ally, who is putting themselves in a position to have hard and weird conversations, I would encourage that person to consider, what are the kinds of conversations that the trans people around you are having to have? And where does your conversation fall on the scale of discomfort relevant to the kinds of conversations that I'm having to have with people right now?
Yep. If, like you said, if you don't know a lot of people around you who are queer, get on Facebook. There are a couple of groups that I can think of right off the top of my head that are extremely liberal and like very vocally queer friendly and welcoming and have a lot of queer people in them. So like, it's weird to say Facebook because like that's not typically where I would suggest people go. But like, why are all the horse people on
good groups
Facebook?
There. Yeah, I don't know. Stuck in some old like, yeah.
It's the only reason I have a Facebook is because of horses.
The horse stuff, yeah.
It's just the horse stuff. But there are people out there. You can make those connections. It's a little bit of effort. And
I would also encourage people to recognize that there are probably queer and trans people in their wider community that they don't know about or they don't know. To be honest, we're everywhere. You might have a trans neighbor that you just have never met.
Or who aren't visibly trans.
Or who isn't visibly trans that you would never, and if you hanging up a pride flag at the end of your driveway does almost nothing for you, but it makes your trans neighbor's day, why would you not? If you're somebody who believes that we all deserve to have equal rights, why would you not try to make that person's day, even if you don't know they exist?
Right. Well, this is the start of several good conversations that I'm so excited to have. Thank you for taking the time to chat with me.
Thank you for having me. That was rambling and I loved all of it.
Yes. I'm very excited. And we will talk to you next time. Thanks for joining us this week at the Horse Girl Gazetteer. You can find us online at Horse Girl Gazetteer on Facebook or Instagram, and Horse Girl Gazette on TikTok and Patreon. You can also email us questions or comments at horsegirlgazetteer@gmail.com. If you find yourself enjoying our content, please leave us a review and share the link with your friends to help them find their way to us. We appreciate any and all support. Talk to you later.